Well, hello, everybody. My name is Dan Skip Allen, and this is the Top 5 Weekly, where we run down various topics in the world of film, whether it be an actor, a director, or an actress, or a topic. In this week's episode, we're going to be running down our top 5 musical biopics. This week, my panelist is Mr. Andrew Cabral. Thank you, Andrew, for coming on again.
No problem, Dan. Thanks for having me. Once again, thanks for making the show so I got something to do on Saturday nights. Damn. This is my social calendar, people. Dan's filling it up. But yeah, it's musical biopics is an interesting genre. It's an ever evolving genre, and we've got some good movies and we got some okay movies, some bad movies, kind of like any genre. But yeah, if you like music and you like movies, they're kind of combining the two together. So it's going to be an interesting list. Hopefully, Dan and I's are a little bit different, or else it's going to be a really boring show.
Yeah, Andrew and I have similar tastes in music, but Andrew always throws in a curveball every once in a while, and sometimes I throw in a curveball. So hopefully we got a few different ones in there so we can discuss. And then, honorable mentions, hopefully we can discuss, because there's a lot of good musical biopics, but there are, like you said, some bad ones. So with that being said, let's get the show started. Mr. Andrew, what is your number 5 musical biopic?
My number 5 is actually one I just watched the other night, and I had been wanting to see this since it came out way back in 2004, and that is Ray, starring Jamie Foxx as the famous singer, pianist, musician, Ray Charles. And this film is interesting because I did not know that it only portrays the early parts of Ray Charles's career, the 50s and 60s, kind of his rising to stardom, if you will. Also, it deals with him having to deal with a lot of internal demons, particularly a drug addiction and infidelity issues and stuff like that. It kind of paints Ray Charles in a not so positive light, which some biopics in general don't do. You know what I mean? They're too afraid to kind of besmirch the reputation of the person they are making the film about, and this happens all the time. That's why you don't see a lot of biopics by certain people. But this one is really good, starring Jamie Foxx, like I said, in an Oscar award-winning role. And this is probably the best acting we have seen from Jamie Foxx. And it's not that he is a bad actor at all. It's just he hasn't really gotten a role as good as this, definitely recently and probably since. And he is a dual threat. I believe he was also a musician as well as an actor as well. So he has done both, and he definitely brings his A game to this movie. This movie also stars a young Kerry Washington, who a lot of people know now for the show she does on television. Of course, her role in Django Unchained, the Quentin Tarantino movie. But Ray is my number 5. Definitely check it out if you were like me and waited years to watch it for whatever reason.
That's so weird that you didn't see Ray. I mean, I was looking on your social media. I'm like, oh, Andrew's watching Ray. I wonder why he's watching Ray. And then I was like, oh man. When you said you had never seen it, I was like, wow, that's a surprise to me, because Andrew's got such good taste in films. You'd think I thought you would have already seen that film by now.
I hadn't. I don't know. It was just I never watched it. It's just one of those things.
Yeah, sometimes films slip through the cracks. I watched one last night I had never seen, which, well, I won't, get into the movie that I was watching last night. But, yeah, I just want to hit on one thing, what you said. Some of these people, they don't want their names, their quote-unquote good name, to be tarnished by having a movie made about them and show them in a bad light. And that's why we have not got a Queen/Freddie Mercury movie by now, because some of the members of Queen want this glorified, wonderful version of Freddie Mercury and the band and the whole rock and roll lifestyle. Well, guess what, guys? That ain't going to happen. That's not what happened. And the actors who portray Freddie Mercury don't want to portray a character based on some glorified way of thinking, and that's Sacha Baron Cohen. And I don't blame Sacha Baron Cohen for that, because I think Sacha Baron Cohen would have been a perfect casting for Freddie Mercury, but those guys wanted to make this kind of goody two-shoes version of Freddie Mercury's life. And Sacha Baron Cohen ain't stupid. He wanted to do the bad things that Freddie Mercury did in the movie. He wanted to portray him as the man he was and not some glorified version of him. Same thing goes for the family of Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra has ties to the mob. He was in bed with the gangsters in New York and so forth. And Martin Scorsese wanted to tell that side of Frank Sinatra's story. Well, Frank Sinatra's son's like, no, God forbid. We talk about all those bad parts about my dad's life. Well, guess who dropped out of the film? Mr. Martin Scorsese. Go make your Frank Sinatra film, glorify. Guess what? Now nobody wants to make the film. If Martin Scorsese drops out of it, that means they realize, well, this movie ain't the movie that we want to make, because he wanted to make the actual good movie about the Rat Pack and Frank Sinatra's life. Nobody wants to see some glorified version of the Rat Pack and Frank Sinatra. So I'm off my soapbox now. I apologize for that. But Andrew brought it up, so blame him. No. I'm sorry, Andrew. I had to get that off my chest, buddy.
It's your show. You can rant all you want.
Because I want to see those movies, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, the Freddie Mercury one is always in constant discussion. Always, like for years now, at least 10 years.
Well, we're getting it now. We're getting it now. It's coming out in January with Ben Whishaw as Freddie Mercury and directed by Bryan Singer. So we'll see how good it is. I'm not really got high hopes for it. But let's get back into the top five with my number five. And my number five is a little film called The Runaways, starring Kristen Stewart. I'll tell you what, this is such a little indie gem that a lot of people do not know about. And I sing the praises of this film so often because it's got Dakota Fanning and Kristen Stewart, and it's got Michael Shannon. Kristen Stewart plays Joan Jett. Dakota Fanning plays Cherie Curry, and Michael Shannon portrays Kim Fowley. Now, he was the manager of this ragtag group of girls in Los Angeles. They're just kind of bumming around, goofing around, and he finds a way to get them all joined up together to form this band called the Runaways. Basically, that's what they were. They were practicing in a rundown little Winnebago or trailer. I mean, it was a crazy scene, and they were just thrust into stardom overnight. And of course, you're going to have problems when you have hot young girls traveling around the country doing all kinds of stuff. Cherie Curry, she got into drugs, and Joan Jett and her started drifting apart as far as their music and the band goes. But we all know Joan Jett later on went on to form the band Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. And we also have Lita Ford in the film. She's portrayed by another actress. I got the name of the other actress right over here on my notes. Her name is, let's see, Taylor something, Courtney Taylor Compton. Her name is Courtney Taylor Compton, who plays Lita Ford. I'll tell you what, I love this film. I could watch this film over and over. You know, the band The Runaways had songs like Cherry Bomb, which you may have heard if you watch movies like The Guardians of the Galaxy, because it's in there. They have a great soundtrack, and they have so many good songs from the band The Runaways. But the thing I want to talk about is Kristen Stewart. She has a bad rap for being this bad actress or something like that because of the Twilight films. Watch her in this film as Joan Jett, and you might have a different sense. You might have a different opinion, because she's phenomenal in this film. And she's got a whole other bunch of films that she's really good in as well. All right, so that's my number five, The Runaways. Back to Andrew with number four.
Number four for me is a film I'm certain many of you have seen already and probably like as much as anyone else, and that is Walk the Line, the film starring Joaquin Phoenix and Reese Witherspoon as, of course, Joaquin Phoenix as Johnny Cash and Reese Witherspoon as June Carter Cash. And this is a film that is really fantastically well acted. Joaquin Phoenix is one of those like kind of method actors who is really enveloped in his roles. And in this film, it's another one kind of similar to Ray, where you see all of the blemishes of this person's character, especially with Johnny Cash with a drug problem, an alcohol problem, his complicated relationship with his family, and his complicated relationship with June Carter. Really, just another one of those films where kind of focuses on the early days of someone's career, because a lot of these famous musicians have lengthy careers that go on for a long time. Some of the greatest, unfortunately, died very young, but someone like Johnny Cash had a career pretty much all the way up until he passed away, which I think was like right before this film came out or something like that. But it's another film that is fantastic, directed by James Mangold. If you're familiar with James Mangold, he is a really talented director. He just did Logan, which is just a phenomenal film in general, regardless of which genre it's in. And he is someone who has delved in different genres, and including the musical biopic, which is not an easy genre to get right, as we are discussing tonight. But this is definitely a great one about a great musician. Johnny Cash, even if you're not a fan of his music, watch this film for the performances, because they are really, really good.
Yeah, actually, my number 4 is the exact same as yours, Andrew. Walk the Line. You know, correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew. Did Joaquin Phoenix get nominated for an Oscar the same year as Philip Seymour Hoffman for Capote? Is that the same year?
I'm looking it up right now. I could tell you he did get nominated. Yep, this was the Crash year. We don't discuss that, but yeah, this is Philip Seymour Hoffman for Capote, Heath Ledger for Brokeback Mountain, David Strathairn for Good Night and Good Luck, Terrence Howard for Hustle and Flow, and Joaquin Phoenix for Walk the Line. So that is a rather stacked category that year.
And you know, and that's the point I'm going to make with since you pretty much went over Walk the Line, but Capote is such a an amazing performance by Philip Seymour Hoffman. And I think Joaquin Phoenix was a lock to win the Oscar if it wasn't for Philip Seymour Hoffman and Ray Charles. Was it the year after Ray Charles won, or was it the year before Ray Charles?
This was the year after.
Yeah, so they had already given the Best Actor to Jamie Foxx for playing Ray the year before, and they're like, well, do we want to give the Best Actor Oscar 2 years in a row to two people playing two musicians back-to-back years? So they gave it to Philip Seymour Hoffman for playing Capote. I'll tell you what, the stuff involving Folsom Prison, with the water, the dirty water, and then the father. You know, we'll talk about Patrick. What's his name? Something Patrick. The Terminator. T2.
Robert Patrick.
Robert Patrick. He's gonna have a theme in this show. But Robert Patrick as his father was very interesting in that film. People always think of Robert Patrick as the Terminator, but the guy has a lot of really good roles. You know, he's in a TV show called Scorpion now, and obviously Reese Witherspoon. You know, I mean, she was due for her Oscar by that point too, so she kind of got the Best Supporting Actress for playing June Carter Cash. But the real main character, Joaquin Phoenix, you know, you started seeing Joaquin Phoenix really progress after Gladiator, and this is another great film for him. This guy's due for an Oscar. He's one of those guys that has never won an Oscar, and those early roles in the 2000s were some of his best roles. And then obviously Her, which he's fantastic in Her, well, whether you believe the movie or not. But yeah, I had Walk the Line as well. James Mangold, great direction. The music. You know, that's one of the themes with a good musical biopic, Andrew, is if you get the rights to the music, when you're making the movie, do you have the rights to some of that music? And there have been musical biopics. Jimi Hendrix one with Andre 3000, where they didn't get the rights to the music. The movie's not good at all. How can you do a movie about Jimi Hendrix, not get the rights to the music? And Walk the Line, and Ray, they get the rights to the music, and that's part of what makes those movies great and those performances great. He sang all those songs himself, Joaquin Phoenix did. I mean, he sounded like Johnny Cash, you know. So absolutely, you have to have Walk the Line in a top 5 musical biopics. If you know, as far as it's obvious, you and I both have similar tastes, you know. So what's your number 3, Andrew?
My number 3 is, I don't think it's necessarily an odd pick. It's a film that I'm not sure if it's a cult classic or if many people have seen it, and that is Sid and Nancy, which came out in 1986, directed by Alex Cox, who is the director that I think needs more appreciation. He hasn't really done a lot of films recently, but he did The Repo Man back in the 80s as well. But he is a very cool director, and this film is about Sid Vicious, who was the bassist for the British punk rock band the Sex Pistols, and the kind of toxic relationship he had with his girlfriend Nancy. And this film is starring Gary Oldman as Sid Vicious and Chloe Webb as Nancy. And this is a very interesting film. It's all about this very toxic relationship. It's very dark, very dirty film, very gritty film, if you will. And there's a lot of things surrounding their relationship and Nancy's death and all kind of stuff. It is a definitely unique film, definitely an 80s film, but Alex Cox brings a lot of uniqueness to the film that I really like. And also the performances, I think, are fantastic. Gary Oldman is a great actor. He was a great actor back then. He's a great actor now. He is someone I think needs to be appreciated more. Granted, he has gotten his Oscar nomination for Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which he was phenomenal in that. But Chloe Webb is an actress that not a lot of people know. She doesn't really do much these days, and she is phenomenal in this film as Nancy. She is just a wild card of a character, and it's a very interesting film. I highly recommend people checking this out if you haven't. The punk rock scene in the 70s and 80s is a wild scene in general.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I did kind of a binge watch of Gary Oldman a couple of years ago because, you know, we did a on a show that I used to host called the Profiles After Show, and I'll tell you what, I never had seen Sid and Nancy, and I watched Sid and Nancy, and I really, really enjoyed that film. Gary Oldman, wow, he's got so much range. He does so many things. He's good at playing the villain. He's just good. I mean, he could put makeup. He's really good. You put makeup on him, he could become some other character. He was really the Johnny Depp before Johnny Depp, really. Gary Oldman was. And I tell you what, he almost does Johnny Depp better than Johnny Depp in a lot of ways. It's so weird to say that, but it's the truth. He is like the Johnny Depp of the 80s before Johnny Depp was popular, you know. Really good choice picking Sid and Nancy. I have it on my honorable mentions. So my number 3 is a little film that I saw in 2014 about the Beach Boys called Love and Mercy. This is a story about the Beach Boys, but it mainly focuses on Brian Wilson, portrayed in his younger years and his older years. And the film goes back and forth. In the younger, Brian Wilson's portrayed by Paul Dano, and the older, Brian Wilson's portrayed by John Cusack. Now, I listened to the Beach Boys. I grew up because my parents used to take us for rides in the car, and they would have the oldies station on a week. So I knew all the music from the Beach Boys. But did I know what went into? Now, sometimes I get this wrong, but is it Animal Sounds or Pet Sounds? The album there's an album. I think it's either Animal Sounds, where he added all these odds and ends to these songs.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, they show that in the movie, and yeah. Brian Wilson was such an innovator. I don't want to cut in on you. He was such an innovator that he did things that kind of scared everybody else because it was so new and so unique.
Well, that album is considered one of the greatest albums of all time from any artist of any genre. And then, of course, did they have the pop songs, the beachy songs where everybody's dancing and having a good old time, and California and Surfing USA and all these different songs? And he wanted to do something different. And that album, 30, 40, 50 years later, is considered now one of the greatest albums of all time. Then you go into the future where he's kind of like in like a drug-induced like stupor most of the thing because of this doctor that's got him all drugged up. And if it wasn't for this car salesman played by Elizabeth Banks, he wouldn't have been saved. Nobody knew this. He wrote this into a book years later, and that's what they turned into the movie. And this is a story that nobody knew, that this guy was basically a prisoner in his own house because of this doctor played by Paul Giamatti. So you get the two distinct parts of the man's life where he's like at the top of his career singing and whatnot. Then he's a prisoner in his own house by this doctor, the psychiatrist doctor who had him all drugged up and stuff. A very good indie gem that came out a couple years. We had two really good indie or two good biopics in 2014. Love and Mercy and Straight Outta Compton. Great portrayals of musicians and people that I didn't know anything about. And that's what I love about this genre is whether you listen to the music or you don't, you learn about the people's lives and what got them to the point that they made the movie, or in the things that happened in their lives. We've had, like you said, Ray Charles cheating on his wives, had multiple wives, and Joaquin Phoenix was in the drugs as Johnny Cash. So all these actors, they're great portrayals of the character. And I think splitting that movie into two parts like that really worked perfectly. And you got to see two sides of the same coin of one man who's really had an interesting, very difficult, interesting life in Brian Wilson. So I had Love and Mercy as my number 3. Now we're going to go. I just saw each week we have a topic, why we picked the topic we picked. And this week, the reason why we picked this topic was because of the biopic about Tupac Shakur called All Eyes on Me. I'll tell you what, I did not know anything about this man. I didn't see the movies he was in, and I didn't listen to, and I still don't listen to the music that the man made, because it's not my cup of tea. But it doesn't mean that I closed my mind to the fact that I wanted to go into this movie and watch it and learn about somebody that I did not know. Same thing with Straight Outta Compton. I went into that with open mind. I wanted to learn about the people, why they did what they did, why they wrote the music they did, what motivated them to do it in the backdrop of their lives and so forth. And the same thing goes for this movie. And I was very glad I got a chance to see this movie. He had a lot of stuff in his life. He had a lot of things going on in his life with his mother, and he moved around a lot, and he didn't know who he could trust. He trusted certain people, and they stabbed him in the back, and then he had to trust other people, and those people were pretty good people to him. But you don't know if those people were threatened as well, because he was in a world where it was a dangerous world. The gangster rap world was a very dangerous world. And Demetrius Shipp Jr., I thought, was perfectly cast in this film. We also have Denai Guerrero from The Walking Dead. She's also going to be in Black Panther. And then we have other rappers that are in Straight Outta Compton and Notorious B.I.G. The same actor that was the Notorious B.I.G. in that film plays that character in this film. So it's like a companion piece, the Notorious B.I.G. in this film and Straight Outta Compton. You probably could watch them as like a 3-part marathon in a way. But I give All Eyes on Me a see it. I thought what I wanted to get out of that film, I got out of it. And I heard some complaints, but I don't know how you could complain about it. I think it's a good movie about, and you learn about this guy's life, and that's what I go into with these kinds of movies when I watch biopics, musical biopics. So that's my take on All Eyes on Me. So let's go to Andrew. We are up to number 2.
My number 2 is a film that is technically a biopic. It is definitely the most untraditional of biopics, and that is I'm Not There from 2007, directed by Todd Haynes. It's basically about the the great songwriter, singer, Bob Dylan, someone who has had a very lengthy career. But this film particularly is so unique and so different because it's not a traditional narrative. There's not a traditional plot. I would dare say there is really no central plot to this movie whatsoever. And the way the film is structured is basically this. Um, Bob Dylan is represented by 6 different characters and 6 different actors, and they are Kate Blanchett, Ben Whishaw, Christian Bale, Richard Gere, Marcus Carl Franklin, and the late Heath Ledger. And they all portray a different facet of Bob Dylan and his career. The poet, the singer, the political activist, all different kinds of things. And it is a unique film with a very uneven structure, but I just find myself fascinated by this film and how unique it is. And I had seen this at a time where I didn't know films could be like this. And I recently rewatched it for this, and I'm still blown away that this film was made and how it was made, because it's so different, it's so unique. If you're a fan of Bob Dylan, there's a lot of Bob Dylan music in this. Bob Dylan is probably one of the best songwriters of all time, or one of the best. And he is still around today. He's not the best singer in the world. He has done pretty much every genre, from like gospel to Christmas music to folk music to rock and roll to country. He's done it all. And this film kind of tries to capture the essence of Bob Dylan, specifically the essence of Bob Dylan in the 1960s, when he was making his way through the folk music scene. Really a unique film. I highly recommend people check it out.
Yeah, it is definitely an innovative film. It doesn't do what most films do, and having 6 actors portray one person is very, very different. You've never seen that before. And I don't know for sure. Did Kate Blanchett win an Oscar for her portrayal of Bob Dylan?
She was nominated for an Oscar for it. I would say she's the standout of the film. Her part in the film, I think, is the most interesting, the most ambitious, and she is sensational in the film. She was nominated for Best Supporting Best Supporting Actress, yes. But she had also won the Golden Globe for it, which is very interesting.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know if she had won or not. Okay, yeah, she was really good. Richard Gere was. I mean, it's a really good movie. If you haven't seen I'm Not There, I definitely recommend it as well, Andrew. My number 2 is a little movie that came out in 1984. It's called Amadeus. Amadeus. I know, it won the Oscar for Best Picture that year. It's about Wolfgang Mozart Amadeus and his life and what drove him to write some of the greatest music of all time, some of the greatest play. What would you call them? Would you call them plays? What would you call them that he wrote?
Well, he wrote music, right? Like concertos and sonatas and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Kind of musical pieces. But what is interesting about that film, isn't it told from the perspective of like his rival, like Salieri, and someone who's just tormented that Mozart is so great.
Yeah, well, that's all I was going to get into. Tom Hulce plays Amadeus, and F. Murray Abraham plays his rival. But at the beginning, he's friends with them. They kind of work together in this stuff. But this guy's like on I don't know, opium or drugs or something, and it causes him to get in these moods and he pisses everybody off around him, and he's just such an unlikable guy. But he's one of the most talented men in the history of the planet. Literally, not just music, but the stuff that he has created is some of the most world-renowned things in the history of music, let alone the time it came out. This took place, what, the 1700s, I think it was. Yeah, it was like this guy was such a tormented guy. He was into drugs, and he was into all this crazy stuff, but it also drove him to be the best he could be and come out of it with some of the greatest music of all time. And How Tom Hulce didn't win the Oscar in 1984 is beyond me. I don't understand how Amadeus. This film was directed by Milos Forman, who, if you did not know him, he has made films such as One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, The People versus Larry Flint. He's made some really good films about books and people and so forth. But Amadeus is his standout work, and it's one of the greatest movies ever. If you don't put I think Amadeus is considered one of the greatest movies of all time. This is when the early 80s is when we were in this artsy fartsy era of films, because we had films like Gandhi winning and Amadeus and Chariots of Fire and these ordinary people, these really kind of artsy films, which then they turned and we went into a different era after that. We weren't doing this before the early 80s, and then we weren't doing this after the early 80s. So 84 was in that kind of artsy period of the Oscars, where all these really interesting films were winning the Best Picture, and Amadeus deserved it. It's definitely one of the greatest musical biopics of all time. I just like one other one a little bit better than it, or it would have been my number one. But I had Amadeus at number 2. So going back to Andrew, I guess we're up to number 1 now.
Yeah, and the reason why Tom Hulce didn't win an Oscar is because F. Murray Abraham won it instead.
They were both in the same category?
Both in the same category, both leading actors.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't like today. It's not like today where you can like stick one in one and one in the other, I guess. Who knows the politics of the Academy, but yeah, Amadeus won 8 Oscars back in the day. That's a pretty high number.
Yeah.
But my number 1 is something completely different than Amadeus, and that is The Doors, which came out in 1991, directed by Oliver Stone. And this is more of a favorite pick for me because I've always listened to The Doors music ever since I was a little kid. And I've seen this film several times, and I love The Doors. I think Jim Morrison is one of the most interesting artists of the 20th century, especially music and poetry, and the sound of The Doors is so unique. And this film itself is so unique because when you have Oliver Stone operating back in the 80s and the early 90s, you get some unique movies. And this film kind of deals particularly with the character of Jim Morrison. Although the film is titled The Doors, you really don't get much about the other members of the band. You just deal with Jim Morrison, who I think is portrayed fantastically by Val Kilmer, who back in the 80s and 90s was really doing his best stuff, really on the rise. But this film also stars Meg Ryan, Kyle MacLachlan, Kevin Dillon is in the film, Michael Madsen's in the film. This is an interesting film, kind of about the psychological makeup of Jim Morrison, who was, as many people know, did a lot of drugs. He did a lot of drugs. He had a lot of weird performances, a lot of controversial performances. His music was just so far out there, especially for the late 1960s. Kind of after the British invasion, this was kind of an American version of rock and roll born out of the jazz and the rockabilly era. It was really unique music. I love The Doors. I always recommend this movie to people who want to see interesting biopics about very interesting musicians, because Jim Morrison was tragically died in the early 1970s. He's actually famously buried in the Paris cemetery, where everybody goes and visits his grave, and they leave all kind of stuff there. They draw on and all the kind of stuff. But yeah, The Doors is my number 1. It's always been a favorite film of mine.
Yeah, I mean, I watch The Doors in the theater, and I watch it when I do these kinds of top 5s or whatever, and I do like musical biopic like marathons and stuff. I always watch The Doors. I just, the thing is, I think a little bit that The Doors is a little bit disjunctive, and it's a little all over the place. And
oh yeah,
and in my opinion, I don't think it's one of Oliver Stone's better films,
Yeah.
but this is why we do this show, because we get to hear different opinions from different people. And I'm glad that it's number one on your list, Andrew. My number one is a film, you know, I haven't said this before, but I'm not really a country music fan, even though I had Walk the Line, and I'm going to have this film as my number one. But I'll tell you what, sometimes some of these country music people, the Hank Williams one with Tom Hiddleston didn't do it for me. I wish it would. I was looking forward to it, but it just didn't do it for me. But this one was a film that related more to me because of the issues with the abusive husband in the film, portrayed by Tommy Lee Jones. And my number one is the coal miner's daughter, portrayed by. This is the movie about Loretta Lynn, and she's portrayed by Sissy Spacek. And this is a time in our country's history where women weren't going out and being successes. They weren't going out being doctors and lawyers and musicians and ball players and athletes and all this stuff. But this woman was breaking ground where there wasn't any ground for her to. She was creating the ground that she was breaking. And Sissy Spacek portrayed her in the music in this film. Loretta Lynn's music is in the film, and it really is a tour de force performance by Sissy Spacek back when she was relatively new. You know, we saw her in Carrie, we saw her in this, we saw her, and she was really kind of coming into her own. But Tommy Lee Jones, as her abusive husband, not wanting her to succeed, not wanting her to outshine him. Well, I'm the husband. I'm the one supposed to be taking care of you. You're not supposed to be taking care of me. But that was the opposite. He was a drunk, and he was an abusive husband. And I'll tell you what, I love the coal miner's daughter, and it reminded me of, you know, a little bit of my own life. You know, I had an abusive father, and to really try to stop somebody from succeeding when you have the ability that Loretta Lynn had. I mean, how could anybody, thinking back on that, how could anybody even think of doing something? This woman was so talented, you know what I mean? And Sissy Spacek portrays her unbelievable. It's also directed by James Apted, or Michael Apted, I should say. Michael Apted. Came out in the early 80s. Great. Or is it early 80s? I don't have the year. I thought I normally put the years of the films, but I didn't put the year for Coal Miner's Daughter down there. But
1980.
1980. Yeah, I knew it was the early 80s. But I can't get enough of this film. Every time I watch it, I get a tear in my eyes, and I really enjoy Sissy Spacek in this film. So, Andrew, that is the top 5 by both of us. So let's get into some honorable mentions. I'll tell you what, we did a great job of really talking about a lot of films. We talked about pretty much, we only had one film that we both talked about. We kind of got a lot of different films out there. So let's try to talk a little bit about some more on our honorable mentions.
Yeah, definitely all the films that Dan mentioned, Amadeus, Coal Miner's Daughter, things that I didn't have on my list. Definitely check those out, and vice versa. But other films that didn't quite make our lists, you know, Straight Outta Compton, which came out recently, is really good. I would definitely recommend checking that out if you were into the NWA scene from back in the day, if you like that music. 8 Mile, which is a film not a lot of people talk about, is kind of a biopic about Eminem's life in a way. And he stars in it. It's kind of like the only acting he's ever done. And for someone who hasn't done any acting before that or since, he did a really good job in it. Another thing, a film that I really like, it is an HBO film, but Behind the Candelabra, I thought, which is about Liberace, I thought was great. Steven Soderbergh. I know Dan doesn't like it. We've talked about this before, but I thought it was just an incredible movie. I definitely understand why, I guess, studios didn't want to distribute it. But a film that I didn't realize was a musical biopic, or a music biopic, The Pianist. Roman Polanski's film, The Pianist, which is a fantastic film, is about an actual pianist, an actual musician, which is very, very interesting. La Vie en Rose, which Marion Cotillard won an Oscar for, is another a music biopic. I mean, we could be here listing these all day. I'm sure Dan has some.
Well, considering the ones that you took already off of me, I was going to talk about Edith Piaf, La Vie en Rose. There's a famous scene in, I believe, what's the war movie? It's Saving Private Ryan, where they're playing Edith Piaf at the end of the movie. And well, Edith Piaf is considered one of the world's greatest opera singers. And she's French, and oh God, what's her name again? You just said it.
Marion Cotillard.
Cotillard. She freaking came out of nowhere for that film. I mean, she was in a romantic comedy with Russell Crowe, directed by Ridley Scott. And then boom, this film comes out, and it's a foreign language film where she plays a French opera singer. It's like, really? Oh God, her life. That movie is so amazing. Another one about a violinist who put another actor on the map over here in our country is, and then his name is Jeffrey Rush, and that's Shine, where he's like this freaking virtuoso violinist, and he had a rough life growing up as well. And if you haven't seen him, he's portraying Albert Einstein right now on National Geographic in Genius. He's fantastic in that. Go see Jeffrey Rush in that. But Edith Piaf, those are the two. And I had The Doors, I had Straight Outta Compton, I had Ray on my list. So
how do you feel about Get On Up? Would that be on your mentions?
I mean, I like Get On Up. I didn't love Get On Up.
I think Chadwick Boseman's performance in that film, I think, maybe better than the film itself.
Yes, exactly. Chadwick Boseman has the ability to rise above the material in like 42, Get On Up, and some of these movies that he's in, the Draft Day. But the material isn't always the best. But it shows how talented he is. And Marvel latched onto him really quick when they like, how long ago did they grab him for the Black Panther before we actually saw him in the Black Panther? You know, they were like, Chadwick Boseman, we need you. And we finally, like 3 years after he was announced for the Black Panther, he finally shows up in Captain America: Civil War. It seemed like it's been forever since they were talking about him as the Black Panther. But I mean, it's such a great, rich genre of film, not just biopic, but musical biopic. And like I said, we're gonna have biopics later this year or next year of Elton John and Queen, and who knows what else coming down the pipe. But those two are going to be two interesting ones for me, because you got Tom Hardy as Elton John, and you got Ben Whishaw as Freddie Mercury. So, and you got a good director behind the Queen movie, Freddie Mercury movie with Bryan Singer. I can't remember who's attached to direct the Elton John movie, but I think what was it going to be called? Rocket Man. I think they call it Rocket Man.
That's the film with Tom Hardy as Elton John.
Oh yeah. You know, when I heard that he was cast as Elton John, I said, "Oh my God, that might be brilliant casting. That might actually be brilliant casting." We'll find out. We'll find out when the movie comes out. I mean, I think it's coming out sometime next year. Rocket Man is. But so for Andrew and myself, Andrew, where can you be found?
You can find me on Twitter at Cabzilla06, as well as my YouTube channel, Cabzilla Productions.
And you can always find me at Dan Skip Allen on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pitches, or at From the Fourth Row. I also do a podcast with my co-host, Mr. Vinny LaSpada, called The Best Damn Movie Show, which that's the channel you're going to be watching this on. If you see this, The Best Damn Movie Show YouTube channel, where I do this show every week with, most of the time it's Steven and Andrew, but I have other people. And then we also have a series of videos that we're doing called The 52 Must-See Movies and Why They Matter. I just posted the latest episode with Stephen Billings and myself, where we talk about Rocky. And the director of Rocky just died. So if you want to hear us talk about him on that episode, that'd be a good place to learn about his career, talking about him directing the film Rocky. And hopefully Andrew and I got a couple episodes that'll be coming out in the next couple of weeks. So for Andrew and myself, good night.